Good morning, everybody. Today we'll be meeting with Senator Richard Black right after an historic meeting between President Trump and President Putin. So I would just like to turn it over to Senator Black. How do you think that meeting went?
Well, I think in a way it was a positive meeting. I'm glad they had the meeting, and now there was not much concrete information that came out, but sometimes just getting a good feel for the atmosphere of the meeting says a great deal. And so I'm going to talk about what we know at this point of the meeting that did occur, and then give a little bit of background on what I've anticipated all along. I've just gone over the news feed. CNN is saying that President Trump has said that his meeting with President Putin made great progress. That's what he said. And he said that there's no deal until there's a deal. And so, you know, they clearly haven't emerged with any sort of agreement. But he said next he's going to make calls to NATO and to Kiev, to Zelensky. Now, Zelensky was not a part of this meeting. As by way of background, Zelensky probably committed the greatest diplomatic faux pas imaginable when he came to the White House with such an atmosphere of utter arrogance. He walks into the White House wearing a T-shirt and combat boots, and which, you know, certainly violates any norms of civilized protocol. And then he has a meeting in the Oval Office with the president and the vice president and proceeds to act like a petulant child. It was a tremendous embarrassment to Europe, a tremendous embarrassment to his countrymen in Ukraine, that he would try to speak over the president and the vice president, and his meeting was such a disaster that the president or the president's staff ordered the entire diplomatic delegation from Ukraine to get out of the White House, and they were left, you know, hurriedly packing their bags, and all of them rushing off to vehicles and being escorted to the airport instead of going through with the normal visit. So President Trump does not like Mr. Zelensky. He's got very good reasons for that. If you go back to his first term in office, President Trump had contacted Zelensky and asked for his help in getting the information on Hunter Biden, who was involved in some extremely fishy enterprises in Ukraine, where he was working with this company Burisma, which was a very shady outfit, and he was being paid a great deal of money, and he didn't speak the language. He didn't know anything. It was in the gas business, the natural gas business. He didn't know anything. You know, he probably didn't know how to light a gas stove. He knew nothing. And so here all of a sudden he's getting all this money. And at one time the government of Ukraine decided to investigate Burisma, and the next thing, President or Vice President Joe Biden shows up in Kiev, and he threatened the government that if they did not immediately fire the prosecutor who was looking into Burisma and all this shady stuff, that he would cut off $1 billion in American aid. And then Joe Biden goes on. He was such an arrogant guy. He went on TV and he literally bragged about the fact that he had threatened the government that if they didn't fire their chief prosecutor who was looking into this thing, that he would take $1 billion away from them, and they were forced to do it. So there's a lot of history with this, because then President Trump, during his first administration, he called Zelensky. He said, I very much appreciate if you would look into what was going on with Hunter Biden in Burisma. And anyway, the next thing you know, it's all over the media. It creates this big firestorm. And so there were lots of reasons that Trump has to have a very dim view of Mr. Zelensky. But in any event, Zelensky chimed in on this meeting in Alaska, even though he was not allowed to be there. And he said that as far as Ukraine was concerned, a ceasefire is the only basis for meaningful peace talks. Well, Zelensky knows that that is not going to fly with Russia. So basically he's saying, well, we're going to demand something that'll just break the possibility of a peace deal. So Zelensky, as usual, is not very helpful. Now, the New York Times has had some comments. They said that when the 3-hour-long meeting ended, that neither President Trump nor President Putin had any questions. And Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, and Secretary of State, our Secretary of State, were both there, but they did not make comments either. And so Trump did say, he said many points were agreed to, and there are just a very few that are left. He said we've made some headway. And then he went on, he said the meeting was a 10. So he said he's very pleased with the meeting. And he said that he talked about his personal relationship with Putin, which is very good. And he says we got along great. And he says it's good when two big powers get along, especially when they're nuclear powers. And amen to that. I mean, that's certainly true. So we don't have an agreement. We certainly will not have a ceasefire. But I think it's always good when the president is able to hear directly from people that the media likes to call bad guys. Mm-hmm. There are other parts of the world that could look at us and call us bad guys. Bad guys, that's just a kind of a silly, childish notion. Nations have interests, and those interests can be very, very serious, and it doesn't help to have those labels. But they go around in the American media all the time. They're bad guys. I even saw something in the New York Times in some article just within the last week that suggested that Russia really doesn't have that much to offer the world. So the ignorance continues. Russia is or has, at least recent years, been the world's greatest exporter of natural gas, one of the greatest exporters of oil, the greatest exporter of timber, the greatest exporter of fertilizer, and the list goes on and on. There's enormous natural resources that are shipped, and there's a great deal of industrial product as well. So, there's sort of this self-perpetuating chain of jingoistic propaganda phrases that are used that actually are believed by journalists who are supposedly, in the know with what's going on. And anybody who says, oh, Russia has no resources, Russia's fallen apart economically, they just have not been looking at the facts. They don't know what they're talking about. Now, I did an analysis of this meeting, and I did this just prior to the meeting. And the way that I look at it is this: Russia they've fought tremendous struggle over recent months, and then it seems like just suddenly within the last couple of weeks, the Ukrainian lines are starting to buckle after a long period, many months of struggle. The Russian troops took over the fortress city of Chasiv Yar. Chasiv Yar is part of this defensive belt of cities that all sort of work together to block the Russian advance. So Chasiv Yar has fallen, and now the great battle of Pokrovsk is reaching a climax. Pokrovsk is very vital to the Ukrainian defenses, and in recent weeks, the Russian troops somehow have managed to actually penetrate into the center of the city of Pokrovsk. Now, the Ukrainians did a masterful job of defending the city for many months, and what's happened is their numbers are being depleted. The entire Ukrainian army just doesn't have the reserves to throw in, and as a consequence, the latest tactic that's been used by the Russians is that instead of using armored vehicles that are great targets for enemy drones, they are putting together companies of troops that are on motorcycles or SUVs, and they'll put together several of these guys, and they put them in little groups, and then they just rush out, and they weave and they bob to where it's very difficult for the drones to hit them. And enough of them get through the enemy lines that they're able to find out where the weak spots are, and then they link up with other people who have made it through, and that forms a bridgehead. And it's been very difficult for the Ukrainians to defend against this. On top of that, there have been, oh my goodness, probably a dozen major developments by the Russians in drone warfare that have come out just within the last 10 or 12 days. And these are big things. And so the ability of the Russian defense base to innovate and create and produce is just beyond anything that any country has recently seen. So all of this is coming together. It's just it's put the Ukrainians to where they're in a very difficult position, and it looks as though their defensive line is buckling. It's starting to collapse in certain areas. Now we'll see. They've pulled it out in the past and restored their lines, so could happen again. But at this point, there really is no gain for Russia in saying, okay, well, let's just stop the fight, because Russia's on the move. It's Ukraine that is on the defensive. They're the ones who really desperately want a ceasefire so that they have time to get in more weapons, more supplies, train up some more troops to take over on the front. Now, I think that I think that both sides, both the United States and Russia, are probably exploring what territory Ukraine must give up in order to achieve peace. And it's very clear that at a very minimum, Russia will insist on having Crimea, which has always been Russian. I think 98% of the people in Crimea, which is a very large island, 98% of them speak Russian. And when they did a plebiscite to see if they wanted to come over to Russia or stay with Ukraine. Admittedly, it's under wartime conditions, but it was almost, it was in the high 90s, which I think is pretty credible. That the people of Crimea have always seen themselves as Russian. For 500 years at least, they've been a part of Russia. And there was just a brief anomaly, a historical anomaly, that actually made them a part of Ukraine for a relatively brief period. So Ukraine, obviously, has got to go to Russia. The other two things, the other two places, are the two republics in the Donbass, Luhansk and the Donetsk Republic. These are two Russian-speaking areas, heavily industrialized, heavy mining activity, and they both broke away. They each declared their independence after the CIA and British intelligence overthrew the government of Ukraine, the duly elected government, and they installed a puppet regime back in 2014 that they then armed to begin attacking the Donbass and ultimately Russia. And so in any event, you have the Donbass republics that, the people there predominantly want to be part of Russia. They view themselves as Russian. They speak Russian. They have Russian history, Russian culture. And Ukraine wants them back because there's a lot of industry in the Donbass. The steel industry, the armaments are produced there, and there's a mine in the city of Pokrovsk, which is being fought over now, that produces 60% of the coal that's used in the Ukrainian steel-making industry. So there's a lot of industrial might that the Ukrainians don't want to give up. The Russians certainly would like to have it, but predominantly they want the Russian people who are there, that they want protected. Now, you go back, Morgan, and the President Trump had said he's going to end the war within 24 hours. And so what happened? He didn't necessarily mean literally 24 hours, but he meant really quickly. And that did not happen. Well, the only way that he could have ended it almost right away would be when he first took office, if he had called President Putin and said, look, give me a week or so to sort this out. Just have your guys do a ceasefire in place. And then he would call Zelensky and tell him, look, we're going to resolve this thing. I want you to do a ceasefire, temporary ceasefire, and then we're gonna get these lines drawn, and we're gonna make some agreements. And if Zelensky balked at that, then President Trump would have had to say, okay, we are going to block your access to US satellite intelligence. We're going to cut off your Starlink geolocation, your ability for your troops to maneuver around by using Starlink. We're totally cutting off the money, arms, and equipment, and just basically slam the brakes on all American assistance. If he had done that, I think he could have compelled Ukraine to stop the war. Somehow this idea has evolved that, well, we got to supply Ukraine to keep them fighting, and then we'll just resolve the war that way. We'll keep both sides fighting. Well, this is what happened in the First World War. Is you had the London bankers who were financing the German side and the French side and the British side. And as soon as one side would win, they'd shift money to the other side, and the other side would start to build up, and they'd get the best. And the bankers were the only ones winning. The London bankers just made incredible fortunes on the war, and they bled everybody to death. This has kind of evolved to be the U.S. policy, is that, okay, we keep funding, we keep giving them all of the intelligence information that they need. We even, it's our Starlink that allows Ukrainian forces to maneuver around on the battlefield, because that's where they get the, sort of the GPS signals from. Mm-hmm. So the United States, the war could never have occurred without the United States' total support. And President Trump was elected to end that and get things moving. So at this point, I think what happened to Trump, I think Trump was sincere about wanting to do that, but he also had to pass the big, beautiful bill that it always drives me crazy to hear the name of that. But anyway, that's what they call it. That's the official name. And but it was very far-reaching and extremely important to the success of the administration. If that hadn't been passed, we would have had the biggest tax increase in American history, and the administration would have gone down in flames as a result. So what happened is you had these senators and some representatives, but particularly in the Senate, you had the war hawks who they've got their connections with the people who are involved in promoting the war, and they are on the side of war. Let's defeat the Russians, and let's go on and break up Russia and overthrow the government, all of this stuff. And they're willing to take enormous risks with the American people's lives to do it. They're willing to go right up to the edge of nuclear war and perhaps to do nuclear war. And so President Trump was put in this position where the war hawks, in passing the big, beautiful bill, were in a position to say, Mr. President, I'd like to help you, but I need your help on something too. I've got powerful constituents and contributors who insist that we help out Ukraine and we make sure that they get the funding and so forth that they need. And I can do a deal with you. You can get my vote, but I'm going to need a little help from you. That's the way these things work. I've been there. I've done that. I never traded off principle, but there are plenty of politicians who will. And so the president was forced into doing this so that he could achieve his domestic goals. And as a consequence, we're just left in this sort of World War I spot where it's not so much the bankers out of London, although the bankers in London are part of it. The bankers in New York are part of it, because these are people who have managed to effectively steal, I don't know what it is, a third or almost $500 billion of the Russian national treasury, which was on deposit with those banks.
Mm-hmm.
And they've seized it and they've turned it into, they've used it to issue bonds, and they're making fortunes. They're making enormous fortunes on these deals. And so the war offers them a great deal of gain, and they want to keep it going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's important to note where we were last year. You know, we were in an administration that was not even engaging with the Russian government, was also posturing in a very provocative manner with the ATACMS missiles. Like you had mentioned before, these ATACMS missiles can only be, I guess, coordinated with American intelligence and actual military interference. So we have, this basic posturing this time last year of inevitable nuclear, war. So much so that you also had the Russian government who, Sergei Lavrov was saying, we're not joking. You can only push us so far. I think the quote that I'm paraphrasing is, what is our world to us if there is no Russia? Because you also had people in Europe and America that were outright boasting about breaking up Russia, that Russia needs to be no more, that we need to topple the government. So it's very important that we remember where we were, juxtaposed to today, where we have the American president actually meeting and breaking that wall with another nuclear power, that is Vladimir Putin. And they rode in the beast to the private meeting, which is exceptionally historic, that they got to have this private encounter, that we won't know what is spoken, but hopefully it is something that is transcending against some of the stereotypes and enables us to work together more. I find this whole thing remarkable, and some of the pundits and news media that are posturing in a sense where they want this to fail. I think that just shows their immaturity. What is really happening in this moment of time, where you're facing time that is far more drastic than the Cold War with the Cuban Missile Crisis. We have so many nuclear weapons where so many people have their fingers on the red button, and we need to have more sound people and sound talks and media personnel that are actively pushing for cooperation and diplomacy. So, there was a tidbit where they had the news or the meeting break, and you had all the news reporters shouting at Vladimir Putin, calling him essentially like a war criminal, which is, it's immature in the sense that we both know that they wouldn't do the same thing to either Benjamin Netanyahu. So their credibility in that sense has definitely gone down the rails, because we know it's not coming from a sincere spot. So, I mean, I think all those things are important to note, and it's so important that we keep our eyes on this and that we root for, diplomacy to win.
Morgan, the war that we're fighting now, in some ways, resembles the Crimean War back in the middle of the 1800s, where you ended up with Britain, France, and the radical Islamic country of Turkey, and they went to war with Russia. And basically, it was a geopolitical power struggle. It's sort of this great game of, we get power here, we get power there, and eventually they did defeat Russia, although that led to the eventual defeat of Turkey later on in the First World War, but you still had this very poisonous combination of France and Great Britain, and they wanted to maneuver on the world stage, and as an outgrowth of the Crimean War, you had a series of things set in motion that eventually led to the First World War, with the fantastic bloodshed. And ironically, Turkey had fought on the side of Britain and France in the Crimean War. They actually lost more troops killed than anybody else. And in the First World War, the French and the British turned against Turkey, and Turkey was defeated in the First World War. So it's like a great chess game with these with France, France and Great Britain really are the two that play this geopolitical game. And of course, the U.S. has become very much a player, starting with the First World War and continuing. But what we have right now is a very similar struggle where you've got the British and the French. Neither of them have an army that's worth a hill of beans. I mean, if they went into battle with Russia and they didn't have the support of the United States, they wouldn't last a couple of months fighting against Russia. But they are very adept at maneuvering, and the London bankers are great at making sure that the right people get blackmailed, the right people get paid off, and they're absolutely merciless. They don't care how many people die, how much blood is shed. This has not changed from what it was during the Crimean War, the First World War, the Second World War, and now here we are. And the major difference between the way that the great power game was played back in the 1850s and what's going on now is that we're dealing with nuclear powers. And I think the system of the great chess game being played, these European chess games over global power, is that it's so entrenched in the system that it goes on, and yet we know, rational people understand that there are thousands of nuclear weapons, and they are ready to go. And we know that at a certain point, if Russia is on the verge of being defeated and broken up, they're not going to use nuclear arms because of something that's going on inside of Ukraine. But if ever NATO was to seriously drive forces deep into Russia and present a danger of Russia breaking up, I think at that point the Russians would say, "That's it, everything launch," and because they would know that we're going to kill them anyway. So, and I think then we all go down in a ball of flame, and you can see now. One of the things I do not agree with the Trump administration on is this idea of pushing Europe to increase their defense spending. And the idea is saying, well, you know, we're spending all this money, you should be doing it, so we want you. Well, what we're doing is we're requiring them to do a massive wartime budget of the European countries. They're coming on a war footing, increasing their war production enormously. For what reason? So that they can go to war. Mm-hmm. I mean, these things, they don't just happen overnight. They happen, they're planned, and and we will be involved in it. Now, right now, part of it is a mechanism to where Trump doesn't have to go to Congress for the funds, because he can just put pressure on the Europeans to buy American arms, and then the American arms get shipped over, and or you know, basically all of the arms that Ukraine needs are still being provided. And now the one thing that they can't get is more manpower, because so many people have been killed in this war. So anyway, it's a very messy situation. I wish President Trump all the best in trying to wrestle these forces to the ground. I don't know that he can do it, but whatever happens, the idea that Russia will just sort of accept some sort of a deal where, you know, it's like a financial thing. It's a tremendous mistake to think of war in purely economic terms. We made that mistake during the Vietnam War, where we had Robert McNamara as the Secretary of Defense. He was the architect of the Vietnam War, and he was brought in from Ford Motor Company, which is a very powerful and respected company in those days, and he thought everything was graphs and charts, and you know, you put some money in here and you get more production there. And he thought of war in that respect, that it was just, you know, on the graph you'll escalate here, and at a certain point you'll cross a line and the enemy will say, okay, that's it, it's cost too much money, we're hanging it up. Well, that was absurd, and it ignored the human dimension of war. And I hope that mistake is not being made by this administration. But I worry when I hear them, oh, we're going to make a deal, we're going to make a deal. You know, it sounds too simplistic, like this is, you know, all you have to do is something like like building a new hotel or something. This talking about people whose children have died on the battlefield. They have enormous personal investments in the war. You have people who are going to give up their lands, or in the case of Russians, if they were to lose in the Donbass, their people would literally have to give up their language. So these are tough decisions, and I hope we at least understand what we're doing. But in any event, I think Right now, Russia has the winning hand. Their troops are on the move. They have the finest military production base in the world, better than the American base, better than anything in Europe, better than anything in the world, better than anything in China. Russia is the best weapons producer in the world. Some areas, they're far ahead of us. Other areas, we're ahead of them, but I don't see Russia just deciding on a whim, oh yeah, let's cut a deal, let's have a little vodka and we'll end this war.
Yeah, I think the very important aspect that we didn't touch upon, but it's not that it's not important. I feel that the what this war essentially, first we were told it wasn't about. Now it's very clear that it was this flirtation between Ukraine and NATO. And so, we have the, I think that is the major impediment to a person like Vladimir Putin just wanting to secure peace or, a ceasefire within Ukraine, because it's just Ukraine or NATO has postured like it won't stop until it absorbs Russia. So it's a very legitimate fear of the Russian people, and we have to respect that and understand that, and understand that when we broke up, when the Soviet Union broke up, we had made this promise not to extend NATO, and we've not lived up to that promise. And at the very least, we must live up to the promise up to their border. So I think it's very important that we keep an eye on this and root for the best with our president, Donald Trump, and what happens with Vladimir Putin, and hoping that the next meeting that they schedule, that I believe they will have Zelensky present, bears some more fruit at bringing an end to this madness that's going on between Russia and Ukraine. So with that, I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and join us next week to focus on the news.
Thank you, Morgan.